Actually, put you on because.
Okay, I'm really excited about this presentation this evening on mobile installs. I'm really excited about it because we were able to pull together a lot of people with different areas of expertise and then tie it all into a presentation to give to you guys. Like I said earlier, this is not an all-encompassing lesson. Every car is different, everybody's going to make different mistakes, and that's how you learn. I highly recommend you start out learning on your old car before getting your new car. All right? Yeah, and then always, ladies and gentlemen, always start on your spouse's car. Okay? You always got to make sure your ride works. Okay? All right. Why does it? The windshield wipers turn on when I hit the radio now. So here we go. This is your mobile install for the amateur radio operator. And then these are the folks who are going to help present tonight. I'm going to talk about penetrating the firewall. I like taking my firewall and making it into a fire sieve using a tungsten carbide drill bit. 1/2 inch is my preferable size. Working with trim. I love actually pulling apart trim as well, and I found a really good video where an actual expert talks about going through the trim. He doesn't get into removing the headliner of the car. That's actually not so bad to do. If you have questions on that, I can talk to you about that a little bit as well. Handheld radio is a mobile rig. Will be done by Bob, as well as connecting to the car battery. There's some stuff, some safety issues there, and Bob took those on. Exactly. Your friendly Inimo mount is also being done by Bob. LMR 240 coax is going to be discussed with Armstead 850Q. I've never used LMR 240. I'm actually really excited to hear what his findings are. Antenna radiation patterns is going to be done by Michael Hoskins and Sue Turner. And Anderson power pole connections will be Chip Fleming. He introduced me to the wide world of those things, and now I have my vacuum cleaner hooked up with the power poles. It's pretty cool. And then placing radio flush with the car dash is also going to be Chip Fleming this evening. So we've got a pretty good lineup, and we're going to try to keep each of these things at about 5 to 10 minutes each, so that way we keep it rolling along real quickly. If you have questions, feel free to, at the end of the presentation, go talk to the person who is feels most comfortable in that field. If you have additional information you'd like to get a hold of. This is okay. Don't freak out. Okay, I took away all the comments. This is the inside of the firewall of a Lexus RX 400, which is the vehicle my wife drives. And I told you where to start. It still works. Actually, you can see there is a tremendous amount of cableage and stuff like that goes through, and then the dashboard is always in the way and things like that. But the problem is that, like, why I brought this picture wasn't to terrify you. It's actually to show you. I know. I'm sorry. I should not have done that. Okay. I should have brought up a picture of a Gremlin or a Pinto. Anyway, but the point of this picture is to show you there is an incredible amount of stuff happening behind your dash that you really have to worry about, and then to complicate matters, if you're trying to get through the firewall, which is separates inside your car from the engine and the burning stuff, you really need to be careful about what your route is of attack. So I'm going to look at this first. We're trying to actually get power to your radio and dealing with the firewall. Lots of times, well, actually every time, the car manufacturers, they have a grommet in there, a nice pathway to go through the firewall, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. Here it is. So on the inside of the vehicle, sorry, this is actually outside. This is on the outside of the firewall. Both of them are, but you get the idea. This is what the grommet looks like. If you look underneath the dash by the steering wheel, you're going to see this grommet, and it's going to have a ton of wires going through it. And the best way, if you can get it to work out, is to run your power cables. This is not my job right here. I would use a red and a black. I'm really, really conscious about the different colors that I use. But you definitely want to, if you can, run it through the grommet. Unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, the grommet worries me, because I try to take like a plastic rod, run it through the grommet very carefully, and then use as a pull rod to get my power lines going through there. What I worry about most, and why I don't do this as an install approach, is because you need to take a little razor blade and kind of cut right there if you don't have the room that the factory's left for you. which is usually nothing, and I'm terrified of actually cutting a wire and then the vehicle won't work anymore. Especially in the hybrid vehicles, I don't know what's going through there, and I just don't want to ruin a car. So I have a fancy pants workaround that always works. I've never once disabled a vehicle with this approach. And here's what I do. What I do is I actually will take the rug in the vehicle and I peel it back as far as I can get it, comfortably. And I start to look around next to the wire grommet. And there's a reason why I try to run next to the wire grommet. I'll get to that in just a bit. And I'll actually drill a hole through the firewall. Now this is one of those fantastic situations where you want to, not like your normal method of doing things when involves like beer and cussing and swearing, where you measure once and cut twice. Do not do that in this case. Measure multiple times. Ask yourself questions, am I really right about this? Because once that hole's there, and if you go through something on the back side of your firewall, it's going to get real expensive real fast. So what I tend to do is I look for landmarks, maybe the steering column or these bolts I go through. I'll get underneath the car and I'll start to look for those things, and I'll make a little map on my own of the firewall on the back side. I also will tend to pop online. I'll make sure there's no wires running in the back of there that I somehow missed. So I'm real careful about not hitting wires or water lines or anything else. So I will tend to peel those things back. This is a little bit low for my taste. This is not a hole that I put in. I tend to go really far up. I like my wires nice and hidden. I don't want my wife to see them. I don't even want her to know that I put a radio in the car. Okay? All right. I'm joking. She has a call sign too. We talk all the time. So this is an example of a firewall boot, and you can kind of see what they do here is as this boot or the grommet gets more and more loaded full of wires, you can actually remove pieces of the grommet. Again, that terrifies me because you're often working, if you're on your driveway, you're crawling around in your car, you got a couple of jacks in there holding the car up. You don't have the luxury of standing up and having your full range of motion. So again, I don't mess with cutting these things up. If I had like a formal lift for my car, yeah, I'd do it if I could see everything, but I can't. So I don't do that with that approach. These are the kinds of things that I do tend to use though. When I go through the firewall and I run my power lines through the firewall, I will never let my power lines come in direct contact with that firewall. Even if the cables themselves have a lot of insulation to them, because over time, vibrations will certainly do a trick to your wires, and you don't want to short out across your firewall. Your radio won't work. Your car will work, but whatever. So I go ahead and I put those grommets in. These ones are actually really fantastic if you can get your hands up there far enough. These are much more permanent, and you can find those on Amazon. They're just firewall grommets, and you can secure those nicely. But these are quite beautiful. I tend to stick with these guys because they're easy, and then I cheat and I put maybe a whole tube of silicone caulking on it because if a little bit's good, more is obviously better. So that's the way I tend to run my power lines going through the firewall. I'm going to take you to the other side of the vehicle real quick on the inside, and this monster you need to watch out for. This is your exhaust manifold right here, and in today's cars, everything is incredibly compact, so you need to be very cognizant of how close you're running your cables to a heat source. If you're not a motorhead, I really like looking at engines, and I'll take apart stuff when I get a chance to if I have somebody teaching me. I've seen the exhaust manifold get red hot before. So lots of times they now have heat shields over them because the cars have gotten to be much more compact. If you're concerned about getting your wires too close to the manifold and melting the insulation off your wires, you can also cheat again. You can get insulation shields, heat insulation shields, and then run those next to the other car wiring. Use another engineer's design to your benefit and run it as close to the existing wiring as possible. All right. So things to keep in mind: stay far away. Once again, from the exhaust manifold, and then the big pipe that comes off the back of that. That's also the exhaust pipe, and it gets a little bit warm too, a lot warm. So that is the thing to stay away from as best as possible. This is the second part of the presentation. I was going to talk to you guys about how to remove trim. I love doing that, especially when I don't break it. But this guy does a really cool job. I have a full-on trim kit removal set. If you want to borrow it, just let me know, and I have all the tools for this. And this video is just a few, what is it, maybe 10 minutes tops on how to do it, but he does a great job. So would you mind hitting lights back there? All right.
Harbor Freight's got the trim lever.
Oh, they do?
For about $6.
Oh, they're fantastic.
It's all plastic. So
Yeah, the plastic ones, he goes into wide. Plastic's fantastic. You're not going to ding up all of the trim in your car with the metal ones. Here you go. All right, let's see if this works.
Hey, Ed Lester here, and this is Showtime SPL. Welcome to the how-to video series of how-to videos for Showtime SPL. Let me show you something. Today we're going to look at how to remove some of the interior panels from your car or truck. You have kick panels and running boards and other types of interior panels that you want to take out to run wire, to deaden the steel, whatever it may be. Now, there's a couple different tools you can use for that. I have some here. And these are panel removal tools, panel pops you can call them, body panel tools, whatever you want to call them. There's many different types. I have plastic ones here. I had an expensive one that had rounded corners and whatnot. It was metal, and it was $45. Kept leaving it in customers' cars, so you got to think about that. This whole set was like $15. So, like I said, a couple different types, and the plastic ones are great because you can get into tight gaps between the panels and not scratch up soft plastics, vinyl, leather, things like that. Now, it's important to know that different cars may have different styles of fasteners. Different eras of cars also do. So the two types of cars that I'm going to show you, I can't show you every type, but I have a Chevy HHR, it's a 2008, and a 2017 Hyundai Elantra. Now let's start with the Hyundai. Here's the sill panel. Now just inspect around to see how it's constructed, how it's fastened to the vehicle. I use both hands and I pull it a little bit just to see where the pressure is. I start checking out the edges with my panel pop tool. I see there's no screws, of course. And I see that the weather stripping is over the panel. So to get the panel out, I have to first pull off the weather stripping. This isn't true in every car, but I found this out just by inspecting and looking around carefully before I just pulled on things. And here I can see in the gap where the clips are. There's enough room I can fit my panel pop tool and pull directly where the fastener clips are. The plastic is reinforced there so it won't bend as it would if you pull in other areas. So try and pull right here where the clip is because of the reinforcement. It's nice and strong and meant to be able to be pried upon there. Now let's look at the kick panel. Here's the hood release. Again, inspect it first before pulling it off. I see there's no screw, just a pressure clip, and I pull right where that clip is. And it pops off. And you can see that the stem is just a piece of plastic, and it's just held on by pressure. So again, pull the panel just a little bit, just wiggling it around with your hands to see where the pressure is. And you'll be able to feel that it's being held on in a certain area. Look there and find a clip. If you can get in the edge and the gap between the metal and the plastic, you can pry it up. There's another clip here and I can't reach it, so I use both hands, wiggle it, and pull it out. And you can see that the clip was in the middle, out of reach of the panel pop tool. But pulling in the front and the back spread the force over the larger surface area and allowed me to pull it off. Now let's look at the HHR. This is my car, so this panel's been off 100 times. It is loose, but still, I'm looking at how the panels are put in place. I can see the sill is over the kick panel, needs to come out first. Using my hands first, I wiggle it, see where the pressure is, and this was easy enough to pull right off. Notice how I didn't pull up in the corner where it would bend the plastic, I pulled from underneath. Now, if I want to use my metal tool, I don't put it in between the two pieces of plastic because it would mar it up. Instead, I go to the edge and underneath, right where the fastener is. I can feel the fastener, so I can get the tool up under there and pull it right up. If I want to use the plastic tool, I can get in between the gap between both plastic panels. They're tapered and sharp enough where it can fit through. And you feel where the clip is, so if you get it right on there, it comes right up. And look at this. The notch in the tool is meant to fit right around these rectangular clips. And if you get in there right where the plastic reinforcement is, you can pry it right up. So now the kick panel. Again, the important thing is to look around, feel the pressure. I can feel it clip there. So start pulling, tugging, not just pulling with brute force, but wiggling it a little bit until it pops out. Use a fine touch and just feel where the pressure is. All right, let's go back to the Hyundai. And here's an interior panel, a dash or a console panel. They're constructed a little bit different. Very important to inspect these. It's all plastic on plastic. Look for any seams and gaps. Sometimes these seams are cosmetic and the panel is actually one piece. Usually if there's two different finishes for the various shapes, you can see the gap, and these will be two panels put together. I can use my plastic tool and push it in the gap to see if there's any separation. If I see movement and I see separation, then I could push it in and start prying up a little bit. And this one actually came out fairly easily. Once in there, I can see the clips. I can see them myself, so I use my hands. I like using my hands more than the tool. It's just a finer touch. I can get leverage in certain areas where the tool can't alone. And once I get it up enough, I have to move the shifter on this one. Set the parking brake if you do this. Don't start the car. So if it's up enough, you can fit both hands in there, start prying up, spreading that force along the entire panel so that you can pull it up gently and not break or clip off. Now once you have it up enough, you can look in there to see how the rest of the panel is constructed. You can see screws or pops or whatever you need to see to get the rest of it apart. Go back to the HHR, and again an interior panel, and I feel around just to see how it's put on, see where the clips may be, see what kind of pressure I need to get it off. And I want to use my plastic tool to get in between this panel, and if I slide it up and around in this seam, it stops where the actual clip is, and that's where I want to pry. That's where I get the force. That way it doesn't bend the panel and mess up the plastic. You can see where all the clips work this way. That can be a lot of work, but it's fun work, right? Well, I have fun doing these videos, and I appreciate you guys stopping by to check them out. Check out the other videos in this series. You know, the reason I do this is to try and pass what little knowledge I have along to you guys, and hopefully it has some value. Well,
Okay, so before I move this thing on to Bob, one thing that you know, especially a person like me, like I like to jump in with 2 feet, and I usually wind up drowning, but I think it's fun because I have to figure out how to undrown myself. When I'm doing car trim, I actually, because I tend to jump in too fast, I've actually started talking to the car. Like the panel, like I'll actually kind of coax it out gently. I don't cuss at it. That makes me pull harder. But I'll, like, you know, it's like, come on, baby, you can do it. And then my wife will walk by. She's like, I'm like, not you, I'm sorry. So that's pretty much what I do. Make sure you map out your runs before you start anything. Think about how the diameter of your coaxial cable, and you have the space underneath your trim to actually run that stuff. Because you don't want to actually start pulling things apart and find out that, oh my gosh, LMR 400 doesn't fit under here. it really doesn't fit anywhere. But you need to, this is definitely some stuff, it's a good puzzle, it's a really good puzzle, and you can learn a lot about your car. And it's really neat, once you get the product done, and you can't see any wires anywhere, and everything's centered perfectly, it's a really good feeling. We're driving around with your ham radio, and you just know it looks amazing. All right?
All right, let me start passing these around so
Sure.
everybody gets a chance to look at them. This is power poles. Go ahead and plug them together and pull them apart so you can see how they work. And these are what I use instead of wire nuts and soldering in the car now. These are called, sorry, my phone always rings when I start to talk. These are called lever nuts, and they're amazing. You just stick the wire in, push the lever down, and they connect. And I use them for all my house wiring now, as well as wiring in the car, even speaker wires. So I'll play with those a little bit.
Where'd you get them?
Amazon, you get a box,
They don't
50
have,
of them for about 20 bucks.
they don't have them at the local store?
Home Depot has something like them. They're a different brand, but I like these ones. So and I pass the box around too if anybody wants the name. It's on here. And like I said, Amazon's got this box of 50 of them for about 20 bucks.
Two comments on firewalls. Last two mobile installations I did, one was a Jeep Wrangler 2013, the other was a Ford F-150 2015, something like that. And in both cases, I ended up finding a path through the firewall that was already left there by the manufacturer. It seems to be getting more and more common. The challenge is finding it, and a lot of times YouTube, online forums, Google is your friend to find it. But I was actually pretty pleased. Like the F-150 was the best. It was a big grommet, not used for anything else, and I just had to punch through it.
Oh, nice.
Away you go. So, okay, so a couple of things about antennas and stuff. This is sort of the not a mobile installation. So what if I just have my HT? What can I do? Well, the good news is all these HTs have removable antennas. So you can attach a mobile antenna to this thing and use it in the car. And so the first thing to do is maybe get an antenna like this. This is a dual band mag mount, pretty small, compact. Does 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and lo and behold, it has the right gender of SMA connector to match my Yaesu radio here. Make sure you get the right gender on that, because like the Baofangs and some of the other Chinese ones use the reverse connector. But this makes a pretty decent mobile rig. Get the mag mount antenna on the roof and run this through the window or whatever, and cruising down the highway, it'll work okay. And especially for like going on vacation, maybe you're flying somewhere and you have a rental car, you can take this with you and use it. So if I do that, I'm going to have like this and this, right? So I plop that up on top, and they're going, hello, hi, K0NR, over. It's the one problem I may have is I'm good until the battery goes dead, right? So you may add something like this to the kit. And that's, this one's actually made by Yaesu, costs an obscene amount of money for a simple cable, but you know, plug that in a cigarette lighter, plug that into the HT, now I've got power, right? And then, but the bad news is, when I do that, it's another cable hanging off this thing, right? So now I got two cables when I'm trying to talk. And so the next upgrade is, I will use a speaker mic. And so I leave the radio on the seat, or maybe I get even more creative and find a way to sort of semi-mount it so it's not flopping around. And I use the speaker mic to talk. And then this is sort of enhanced speaker mic. I actually don't know if this is legal in Colorado, but turns out Heil Sound, who makes all the really high-end microphones, they make some pretty affordable headsets for HT. So I bought this to use on Summits on the Air activations, because it's got the little phone gizmo on the microphone, it knocks down the wind noise, because it's often windy on the top of the summits. And I've actually found this to be pretty handy, and they've got them set up to match your different HTs, right? And I'm pretty sure that's legal in Colorado, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, it's
Using the microphone.
noise canceling ones.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, emergency vehicle canceling.
yeah, so I think that's all good. Yeah, mounting. You might think about how can I fix this thing so it's not flopping around too much. And just in general, I mean, always safety first, right? Don't get so focused on your radio. You know, I've heard some people actually will text while they're driving, you know? I've heard that. I have this friend that does that. And same issues with the radio, right? If you're just operating the radio, if you're just talking, you're pretty safe. But if you're fiddling with it and your head's down, that's an unsafe thing, right? So don't do that. Okay, connecting to the car battery. This is going to be kind of a quick run through. Most important thing from this slide is the first bullet, W0BG.com. Alan has a super website that talks about all these issues in depth. He has researched it. He follows what's going on in the automotive industry, and has all kinds of information out there. So I would spend some time on that website just absorbing what he has to say about mobile installations. If you've been around ham radio very much at all, they always stress connect directly to the battery. And so what they're really saying is don't tap your power off of like the fuse box that might be underneath the dash, or don't try and draw lots of current out of the cigarette lighter. The best thing to do is go directly to the battery. It gives you the lowest impedance, lowest resistance connection, and you tend to avoid things like alternator lines and such. But that story's starting to shift now, because, and K0BG lays this out really well. I pulled this picture off of his website. Because of all the emphasis on energy efficiency in cars and gas mileage and all that, they're trying to squeeze all the efficiency they can out of these systems. And one of the things they now are doing is they're putting a sensor in the negative lead going to ground. And it's called the ELD, electrical load detector. It basically monitors how much current is going through there. And I'm not sure why they put it in the negative lead, but that's how they do it. And because of that, you no longer should connect, if your car has one of those, you should no longer connect to the plus and minus terminals of the battery. You should go from plus down to a chassis ground, ideally right where they attach that ELD, and do your connection off of that. And I had to do this on my F-150. It had a setup like this. Because if you don't do that, if you pull it here, you're going to confuse the heck out of the car's fancy system that's trying to manage that battery, because it won't know how much current you've drawn off of that. So be aware of that. The other thing is you put fuses in both leads, and that, you know, if you've been around house wiring, you kind of go, well, you never do that. You only fuse the hot. The breakers always go in the hot. You never fuse the ground. Well, on ham radios, transceivers like this, you want to fuse in both leads. And actually, if you look at these radios, I don't have one hand, but they'll come with fuses in both the plus and the minus. And I won't go through the fine points of that, but basically, there is a condition where you could have a fault in your car and a whole bunch of current could come back through the negative lead and fry that overload and fry that wire, and so you want to protect against that. Wire size, typical VHF, UHF mobile draws 8 to 12 amps, so I said use 14, 12, or 10 gauge. I mean, you know how wire gauges go, right? 14 is smaller than is a smaller wire than 10, right? So I think 14 is about the smallest you ought to be using. And of course, bigger is going to be better until it gets so big you can't deal with it. But another rule of thumb is take a look at what the manufacturer did on their lead, and don't go any smaller, right? Maybe go a little bigger, because sometimes these guys put kind of small, they put just enough on there. So that's kind of a rule of thumb. And then cigarette lighter plugs, I say, I never use those except when I do. Because if you listen to K0BG, he'll say, don't ever do that. Don't ever run your radio off of the cigarette lighter plug. Because they really aren't set up for that kind of operation. And he's got evidence that people that have put large quantities of current through their cigarette lighter plug have actually had some, what's the right way to say it, some of the wiring heated up and was a safety issue. But I think for sort of lower ampere kinds of uses, certainly for an HT, I'm only running 5 watts with that HT, this kind of thing is fine. You could probably get away with running a mobile radio like this, but maybe running it at like 20 watts instead of 50 watts to get the current down. So I will do that from time to time, to just be super careful. Okay, antennas. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the NMO mount, because it's kind of the standard that was developed by Motorola. It's called the new Motorola mount. Standard for land mobile radios. All the cops running around with all those antennas on the state trooper's car, those are all NMO mounts. Here's the classic NMO mount. It's this little threaded saucer thing. You drill a hole through the sheet metal of your car. You like this.
That part.
Do it on your wife's car first, and then this thing comes off.
Drill to the small hole, not to the big hole, you guys.
So that thing pops up in there and through the sheet metal, and then you come back and you tighten this thing down. It's really a very quality kind of mount, and I've basically have standardized on these because there's so many antennas available to go on this mount, and it's a really good design. So I'll pass this one around and take a look at it. But then you go, okay, what's the problem? It's a 3/4 inch hole. It's kind of scary, right? And people go, well, they're scared to drill a hole in their car. They're very scared about 3/4 of an inch. And then the next story is, well, it's going to ruin my car's value. Well, my point of view is I usually keep the car long enough that the value is degraded down. That little hole on the top, when I go to sell it, I put a plug in there that are easy to find. And actually, nobody notices that compared to, the dented fender or the paint that's peeling or whatever.
Or the paint that's been worn off by a mag mount.
Yeah, the paint that's
Mag
worn off
mounts
by a
will tear up your car.
So anyways, so you go, I don't want to do that 3/4 inch hole thing. There's all kinds of other options. That's one of the nice things about it. One of my favorite mounts is this little L-shaped wedge thing. And what this is really intended for is say put that on, say you have a sedan, right? And you have a trunk, the trunk of your sedan. You open up the trunk, and there's a little lip off to the side. You can put 3 very small screws in there, and this thing sits kind of on your fender next to the trunk lid. But I can also put it on the hood in the same manner, right? It attaches to the front fender near the hood. I've often used those. Or it becomes kind of a general purpose little, wherever I can put a few screws, I can drop the NMO mount in. And I shouldn't have passed that thing around, but it's got a 3/4 inch hole. So the NMO mount screws to this thing instead of your car sheet metal. But that's not all. There's, like on the Ford F-150, I found a vendor who makes a bracket like this, it's shaped a little differently, that fits perfectly onto the F-150. I took like one bolt out and it dropped right in, and I put the bolt back in, and the mount was ready to go. It's on the left front, the driver's side front fender, and that's what I'm using on my F-150. There's other options, like this one is a trunk clip mount. So this guy slides onto kind of your classic sedan. It has a trunk lid, and it's got a couple of set screws, and you get up there in there and you tighten those down, and I can put whatever NMO antenna I want on top of that. And then last but not least, we've got a mag mount that has the NMO mount on it. And I actually keep this one around. Usually it has this guy. This is dual band antenna for 2 meters and 70 centimeters. It's kind of it's a Larson 2/70, if that means anything to you. I usually keep that in the truck because if I want like a really good antenna, like out on the road, I'll pop this baby on the top of the cab, and it works really, really well compared to like a shorter antenna I usually have on the fender, which is truly suboptimal. This is like way better. You can get scratches, like Chip was saying, but you know, for a lot of guys, the mag mount is not a bad way to go. Installation is super easy, right? You plop it on the top of a car. They work really well. The biggest hassle is how do I route the coax? And if you're kind of creative on where to bring it, probably through a crack in the door, find a place where the door gasket is not too tight, or say, like my favorite one is like on an SUV, the back hatch, usually if you plop this guy on the top of an SUV and kind of carefully run this straight back and then through the gap between the hatch cover and the main body, you can usually get through there pretty well. And then once you get it inside the car, you tape it off or whatever so it's not flopping around. It really kind of stays out of the way and is pretty convenient. I've got tons of antennas. Here's the quarter wave for 2 meters. Here's the quarter wave for 2 meters plus the little coil that makes it work on 70 centimeters. This is what, half wave, I think, for 2 meters. I've got antennas for 6 meters, 10 meters. I got a good collection of NMO antennas. All right, what did I miss?
Oh, that's it.
I think that was it.
Hey Bob, concerning drilling 3/4 inch hole, the preferred bit for that even inexperienced people will have success with is called a step bit. I don't know if you've seen them, they're shaped like a cone.
Okay, good.
And first they'll drill an 1/8 inch hole, and then they'll drill a 1/4 inch hole. It's like several drill bits all combined in one cone. And you can cut through 3/4 inch steel with that, with just a hand drill. It takes a while, but it's a very flawless way of creating a big hole, accurate hole.
Okay,
And
good.
metal.
The other way is a punch, right? They put a,
Yeah, if it's thin enough.
you drill a hole and somehow you get the punch mechanism on each side and tighten it down. I will confess, I have never drilled a 3/4 inch hole in my car, any of my vehicles. One time I had the Car Toys guys do it for me. They did a pretty good job. The other time I had a guy in town that does, he does land mobile stuff for the state patrol and stuff, and I had him punch 3 holes in the top of my Ford Escape. I gotta tell you, you put an antenna in the middle of the roof with a decent sized sheet metal roof, it works really well. It is noticeably different compared to slamming something on a fender or something like that. Okay, I'm done.
Alrighty. Okay. Next up is Armstead talking about LMR 240.
Yeah,
I was busy this week and I should have asked Jonathan what he was looking for. I've got LMR 240 somewhere, but what I found was BR 240, which has the same specs. And this is actually LMR 240 Ultraflex. The difference is the center is stranded instead of solid. And that makes it able to make tighter turns, which can be a consideration when you're doing mobile. If you wanted to see the comparison, I have to have quite a bit of that 240. Now, unfortunately, I use it a little bit too often. Bob was going to use his 1.2, and I've got a 1.2 antenna on the roof, but I forgot that I wired it up to this thing. And the losses are just incredible with that frequency. So there wasn't much power getting up. And that's, to me, that's a really important consideration. The bigger the coax, the lower the losses in general. And I always like to look at the losses before I buy the coax for application. There are a lot of tables. I tried to get this chart to jump up here in the thing, but it wouldn't do it. I don't know. It wanted a URL for it. But there are a lot of charts on the internet. Almost all the good vendors have loss charts on coax, and so that's an important thing. The other thing is you got to pay some attention. Usually with what we've been talking about tonight, power is not much of an issue. But if you're going to put an amplifier in your car, you need to pay attention to the ratings of the coax, because you could exceed, could be possibly exceed. So that's really my thoughts. I'm not sure what I think. I don't even know what I wired my truck with. I think I used 213, and I've got some hard line to put in there.
You got hard line in the back of your truck, is that what you're saying?
I've got some half-inch hard line, a quarter-inch hard line I want to run, because my antenna, my HF antenna is all the way in the back, and the radio's all the way up in the front. So I'm going to run hard line.
So maybe, just as an example, or for reference point, the smaller size coax is kind of the standard for mobile, right? It's RG58 or RG58 equivalent. I forget the diameter.
That looks like 8X. That's not 8X?
I don't think so. I think it's 58.
That's awful small.
8X is like quarter-inch diameter, and I think this is slightly less than that, maybe 0.2 something. Anybody remember? But this is kind of the standard, but as Armstead saying, if you want to run higher power or you're really worried about the loss, then you can start going bigger. Bigger is better, except it's harder to route through the vehicle.
And my approach on the antenna on my truck is I drill 3 holes and put 3 feed-through barrels under the back seat. And so, and I just peel the carpet back and just,
Yeah, this says RG58.
looks small for 58.
Armstead, can I see your cost of this?
Oh, I'm old school, and I didn't, I haven't completely converted over to Dr. Hoskins' recommendation of crimping. So I have a coax stripping kit here for soldering. This turns out to be kind of handy. DX Engineering. So it's got strippers for the 240 and the 213, the more standard size. Tools to help screw the pieces together. Cable cutter to keep the cable round. That's always good. If you cut it with like dikes, you need to kind of squeeze it to get it back round again to get the parts to fit together. One other point I wanted to make, when you're using a smaller coax like 240, you need an adapter for your UHF connector. And it turns out there's two sizes of these things. And, you know, you want a good tight fit, so be careful when you're buying these to get the right one. What'd you do there, Mark?
It's over that way
Oh,
now.
okay. Well, I was gonna see, anyway, there's two of these that you put on to adapt it to fit UHF connectors. And you want a good fit, so that's something to watch out for. I forgot the numbers on them, but
Awesome. Thanks, Armstead. And then, Dr. Hoskins, you're up for the radiation patterns.
yeah, well, I found out Stu had prepared slides on this, so I was lazy.
Dr. Turner, you're up for the radiation patterns.
Well, with a couple of notices. First of all, I've been getting up really early to go to work lately, so it's past my bedtime. And second, my slides aren't as pretty as Jonathan's, because I didn't have any time to create them or work on them. So I got show and tell instead a little bit. But these are for me. Most mag mounts. Let's see. Here's Bob's mag mount. So this mag mount that Bob was showing you is, as he noted, a quarter wave antenna. So that means that its segments are cut to be 1/4 of a wavelength long. So there's a quarter of a wavelength roughly for a 2-meter band, or for 70-centimeter band down here, I guess. I'm not sure which way that works, but when you plop one of these on your roof, as Bob was noting, you're creating a ground plane, or providing a ground plane for this. And that ground plane, those of you who are in the technician class, what does it provide you? Yeah, the other side of that half-wave dipole, right? It's a flat surface, but it's almost like a mirror reflection.
Good.
Oh, look at that.
We worked the entire Waldo Canyon fire from Red Cross headquarters on this in the window.
Pizza pie plate.
And it worked
mag
beautiful.
mount. I love it. So that's giving you the other half of the dipole. But the key thing is, if it's in the center of that roof of your car, you've got more or less an equivalent flat area around, and you're going to get a nice, even radial pattern about that antenna. So your takeoff, or your power output, and the power pattern radially around the antenna like this is going to be more or less even. If you're over on the edge of your ground plane, you're not going to get such an even pattern. You'll have nice radiation perhaps in the direction where you've got some ground plane in front of the direction of travel, but off to the backside over here, you won't have as much of a ground plane effect, and the performance in that direction or those directions is going to be reduced somewhat. Will it still work? Yeah, probably so. Especially if you're running 20 watts out of here, you're going to easily hit a repeater whether you've got that ground plane going for you or not. So it's not a huge effect, but just be aware that you will get a different radiation pattern with different areas on the ground plane.
If you happen to need a little more signal, the omnidirectional isn't doing it for you, you can take that and stick it on the hood and face the rear end of your car in the direction you want to try and get to. And your lobe will be expanded in that direction because of the way the ground plane is set up. So that's one of the ways you can get a little more signal out in a specific direction.
Yeah, so when you position the antenna, rule of thumb here is just be aware of where you are on the ground plane, whatever metal surface you've mounted that mag mount to, and recognize that your performance of your transmission is going to be a little better in the direction where you've got that ground plane in front of you. Car roof or trunk is really fine, as Bob mentioned, for the mag mount position. Another point is that, let's see, we said that. Yep, we covered that one too. Okay, a half-wave antenna, which, one of these, is this one a half-wave, Bob?
No, it's 5/8.
Is it? You have a half, is this a half
That's a
here?
half there.
Okay, so the half-wave is not as dependent on that ground plane. It's going to give you pretty good performance without having the huge ground plane there. So what's the disadvantage of this one though, compared to this one?
hits more trees.
Yeah, it hits more trees, you can't get it in your garage. My good friend James, KD0MFO, he had a nice tall half-wave antenna like this on top of his very fine 1994 Nissan pickup truck. And multiple instances, his wife drove the truck into the garage for him without folding the antenna down, which it had a little fold and you could knock down, but she didn't think about that. So if you go to the halfway, you gotta be a little careful about that. You will get, generally speaking, a nice radial pattern around the antenna, again, this way. There was another point about that I've forgotten. What was it? Oh, yeah. If you have a clip mount, and I've got an antenna here with a clip mount on it. Here's a little quarter wave antenna with a clip mount, sort of like Bob was referring to earlier. I'll pass this around. But if it's on the bumper or on the back of your trunk and your car cab is sticking up above where that clip is and part of the antenna, what's going to happen there? Yeah, you're going to get some blockage, right? So again, your radiation pattern is going to be affected if you're using maybe a clip mount like this and you've got some vertical extent of the vehicle in the way of your radiation. So maybe, I'm sitting here in the cab and my antenna's back there and I've got the roof over my head and the supports for around the cab. Well, that metal is going to block my radiation and some places, and I'm going to have a less than even radiation pattern, and that might actually affect my performance somewhat. I'll pass this guy around. This is a shortened 2 meter and 70 centimeter antenna. It's got a little capacitance hat on here and some other electronics that do the dual band job for you there, but it's got a little trunk clip. And this antenna survived a rollover. My son totaled my car for me a couple of years ago, and that antenna was
robust antenna
on top. And it is. You will see it's been.
Halfway.
Oh.
Okay, another option, and another kind of an interesting factor is this antenna kind of looks like a half wave, but as Bob mentioned on this antenna, it's really called a 5/8 wave. Is that right? 5/8? Where are you? There you go. It was 5/8, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a little bit different design, and compared to the half wave, it has an interesting effect. So any antenna, a vertical antenna like this, is going to have radiation radially around the antenna, right? And it's got some angle of takeoff like this, maybe, right? So we've got a kind of a cone-shaped radial donut-like thing shining out around this antenna. If we take that cone and do this, squeeze that energy, the same amount of energy, into a narrower angle, what's going to happen? What do we call that? Gain. Yeah, compared to this,
Right.
we're going to get some gain if we're like that, right? If the angle is narrow, there's more energy in a smaller angle. This 5/8 antenna, the 5/8 wave antenna, will do that for you. It provides a little bit of gain by squeezing the pattern vertically. You still get a radial pattern around, but it's a little bit narrow. So what's the advantage of that? You got some gain. You don't have to put as much power in to the antenna to get an equivalent or a better signal out, higher power, effective radiated power out of the antenna. What might be the disadvantage of something like that in an area like we live in?
You can't get it high.
Yeah, hitting a high repeater. So if you're down close to the bottom of Pikes Peak and you want to hit Pikes Peak repeater, it might not happen with this antenna, but the quarter wave or the half wave might do fine, depending upon that takeoff angle or the angle of the radial extent here. So just something to be aware of if you go with the 5/8 wave antenna. This one came off of my truck and it's mounted to the back end without any ground plane around it, but it works really, really well.
How close does the ground plane have to be? The reason why I ask is on the Lexus, that thing is sitting, I have a little jig that I built, and it's sitting on the roof rack, so it's separated. It's about I don't know, 4 inches above the roof of the
Yeah.
Lexus. Did I just effectively destroy the ground plane by doing that?
Yeah, pretty much.
Dang it. Now I'm gonna put the hole in my wife's
Am I
car.
wrong? Bob's probably
Yeah.
more insightful about that than I am, but
Let's see.
my understanding is if you're up on the roof rack, you're not doing yourself any favors.
All antennas are a compromise, and that's just one more compromise, right?
Right.
It's not gonna work as
Do you want
well.
me to pass the 5/8 around? Do you want to see it?
Might be a nice surprise.
I'll send it around. You
It's
can-
not.
It's an antenna. Let's see. We did that. One thing on antennas, if, most of these antennas, especially like that little one going around that quarter wave, going around to this quarter wave here that Bob showed you, they have the coax kind of built in. It's already sealed up here real nicely against the antenna, and you just route that into your car. That's not always the case, especially with HF antennas. If you're going to an HF station in your car, if you don't have a pre-sealed antenna like with the coax like this one is, that's going around over here, be sure you seal that coax up and that connector really well, because you're going to be out in the weather with your vehicle and you can get water penetration really easily. So be sure you pay attention to sealing up those coaxial connectors. And this is what Bob said earlier. Many modern vehicles already have access ports into the cab through which the coaxial cable can be discreetly routed, just like through the firewall. I found that on my 2009, what do I got? Toyota Tacoma, that there's access ports in the back of the cab. I was able to route my coax through in order to get to the radio, and popped up some of those plastic panels and routed it underneath there. So look for those things. Look in your auto manual. Sometimes they'll point out to you where those ports are. Not so common on older vehicles, but newer vehicles, they seem to be getting better about installing such things. So that's everything I've got. The questions about any of that stuff that I covered there? Barry!
Now, pick-em-up trucks and everything else for grounding, I hear it's good to make an extra ground on the frame. From
Yeah,
the cab.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms to open up to start to talk about grounding. With an FM station, you know, like most of our new technicians would be installing in their car, you don't have to worry about that quite so much. With an HF station where you're going to be using sideband and you get a lot more noise and interference, it's a good idea to make sure you've got a really solid ground for your system, and that is the body of your vehicle. Now, a lot of vehicles, particularly pickup trucks, they are not well integrated electrically, at least not for alternating current purposes at radio frequencies. They might show well grounded together with a DC meter, but when you get to 14 megahertz, maybe not so well. Maybe have a high impedance connection between the two. So what a lot of operators will do is take some of the braided strap, like we showed you guys in the class, the tinned braid. The solid copper strap's not so good for this because after it wiggles a while, it's going to break in two. But that copper braid or braided strap is really nice for doing this. You get underneath the vehicle and put a screw into the bed of the truck and wrap that braid over to the cab of the truck and put a good screw in there and get a better grounded connection between those parts and pieces of the vehicle. Many operators will do this between the cab of the vehicle and the trunk if it's a sedan, or the hatch and even the doors. You just kind of have to test and try by trial and error to see what's giving you the best ground and whether you need those additional straps or not to kind of tie your vehicle together. One other place where that comes into play is with the exhaust system, believe it or not. The exhaust system can serve as a real nice antenna that's running linearly, and it's got those rubber grommets or rubber mounts, so it's isolated from the rest of the vehicle, so not grounded very well, and it's going to pick up pick up radio frequencies because it's a nice long chunk of metal, right? So if you ground that to the vehicle body, you can also help to more tightly integrate that single chunk of metal together as your ground for your station. But that's all pretty advanced stuff, and for HF stations primarily, and recommend Alan's website that Bob mentioned to tackle issues like that. But good question there. Anything else? Any other questions? All right, I'm going to shut up.
I'll get you guys out of here in 5 minutes. This is my Geo, it's sitting outside, and I had a real problem trying to figure out how to get the antenna on this thing. So what I ended up with was an aluminum mount, bent a little bit so it made the antenna close to vertical, and then just run the cable through the soft top. And it works great. If you take a look at this antenna, the thing I really like about it is it's very floppy. I got it on eBay for 20 bucks. And I can pull it right into my garage, and it just kind of bends at the garage door, and it's perfectly happy.
Can your wife pull it in there and have it?
She has. She broke the antenna on our Kia a couple of times, and I've gone to the same thing on it.
So you and James can commiserate then.
And I should admit that I have broken the antenna on the Kia twice, so.
Yeah, I was gonna ask whether it's always the wife.
No, that's just how you get the blame.
Here, it's always the wife.
No, I admit to having done it myself. I've broken a lot of antennas. Anyway, there's lots of ways to get around problems with cars. On a soft top like this that I take off for 3 months a year, there's no good place to put an antenna, and this worked out real well. And there's no place to put a mag mount on this thing. This is something you may find interesting. I do a lot of moving radios around. This is a PL259 adapter from standard female to a push-on male. So it's a quick connect, PL259, kind of a neat device to have if you move radios around a lot. Hopefully this will. Okay, this is my little 95 Geo out here. I had a Jeep for a long time. I love the Geo. Go places the Jeep wouldn't go, costs a quarter as much to work on, gets better mileage, and it lasts better. This is, I can't see the picture. There we go. This is my Android computer in my Geo. But this is, I pulled the ashtray out and found a radio that exactly fit where the ashtray was.
Pax on.
And it really is kind of cool. It looks like it was meant to be that
How
way.
often do you have to empty the radio?
It depends on who I'm talking to. If it's Stu, it's every day. Anyway, the point is, look at your car and think about it. There's a lot of things you can do with it. This was a double DIN mount, so the Android computer put right in. And this looks like a fuzzy picture, but it's not. It's a dirty Geo. Off-road a lot. But anyway, this little 25-watt radio, and I can work Pike's Peak repeater just fine with that little antenna from the top of Wilkerson Pass with it. So don't be afraid of lower power radios. For VHF, UHF, 25 watts is plenty. You really don't need more than that. And one advantage of that is you don't have to have big wires. You can use little 14-gauge wires that the radio manufacturers supply. This is one of the Chinese radios you can get for about 75 bucks now. It's dual band. It's a nice little radio. The QYT that I talked about, there's a couple other ones floating around here. The point is, look at the places you've got to stick things in your dash. The odds are you can find some radio that will fit in there. The other thing that's become increasingly popular, this one has the capability, this Yaesu. A lot of the better radios have a removable front panel. And you can actually snap the front panel off, and they have a mounting bracket that you can stick it someplace and put the radio box down under the driver's seat or wherever it's convenient. So there's a lot of ways to mount these things so you don't have to have a whole big radio sitting someplace where you can get to it. Our Taurus has a weird little box that I never figured out what they intended to be for in the dash, but the QYT that I have just fits exactly into that. And I drilled a little hole in the back of the power cables. It works beautifully. Took a lot of pictures because I wasn't sure which ones would come out. Okay, power poles, and these little lever, they call them lever nuts because wire nuts are the standard device. These have completely replaced wire nuts for me. Wire nuts don't work with multi-strand cable. If you've ever tried to put wire nuts on solid cable with stranded cable, and then take it apart, and you find out you had one strand that was actually making contact, wire nuts suck. My grandfather was an electrician for years. Until he died, he still soldered every connection he made in the house. And these things are just about as good as soldering. I've been extremely impressed with them. The way they work is, we passed them around. This is a 3-gang device, and there's a bus across the back here, so you stick wires, you pull this lever up, stick the wire in, push the lever down, and it's locked in and connected to the bus. The neat thing about this, for power connections in my vehicles now, this is what I use. Because if I need to add something else later, I just flip up one of the levers and stick another wire in. And they're really, really nice. They're a little more expensive than wire nuts, but with one hand I can do this in 30 seconds. Trying to get my mouth in so I can hold 4 wires together and get the wire out. It's not fun.
Should you always disconnect the power first? I'm getting away.
There have been times when I did. The other thing about soldering, one of my favorite stories, I've still got a scar. Soldering a fuse holder in the chassis on a radio one time, and soldered the fuse holder in, and then pulled the fuse out and did this, and started to work on something else. Don't do that. Okay. So that's all I'm going to say about the lever nuts, but I recommend them highly for making a power bus in your vehicle. What I do with the 5-gang one here is I glue 2 of them back to back, or use double-sided tape for positive and negative, plus and minus voltage. Then I've got a bus bar underneath the car, run 10-gauge. They're rated to 12-gauge solid, and I use them on the house now.
Oh, is that right? That's 20 amps.
They're 20 amp rated, yeah. I've used them with my HF rig for up to 30 amps, seem to be fine, but
You use these in house wiring?
absolutely, they're rated for house wiring.
Are they?
Absolutely, they're rated for house wiring, and I like them much better than using wire nuts.
Yeah, I can see why.
But with 5-gang like this, like I said, you can only get 12-gauge solid into it, but 10-gauge stranded, you can actually push in there and lock it in. And it locks in tight, so I use that as my main bus to the battery. And then I've got 4 ports here I can stick car stereos or whatever. Okay, enough on the lever
Pretty
nuts.
cool.
I like those things, I recommend them highly. And they're, like I said, the box I was passing around, I think I got 50 of them for $20 on Amazon. Power poles, Anderson power poles. If you work with Aries, work with any place where you're taking your radio, you're going to be plugging into somebody else's power supply, the odds are they're going to be providing an Anderson power pole connection. They're what's called an androgynous connection, so as long as you put the red and the black on the right side, there is no upstream end and downstream end. You can just plug them all together. And you can get these little, make these little distribution boxes that have, and it goes into and a bunch of goes out as, with, you can get them with meters, with fuses, with all sorts of different things. And it's a real easy way for a bunch of guys to walk into a place, just plug their radios into power and be on the air. For connecting them, I'm going to pass around this is what goes inside the power pole. And I was engaged in discussions at Martin Marietta for years whether crimp is better than solder. Both. And I do both. So it's just, but with one hand and the right tool, it takes me 4 minutes to put together a 12-gauge power pole connector. And they're rated, the actual contacts are good up to about 60 amps with minimal loss. So you can unplug them and plug them together again because of the alloy they use for the connectors. They've tested them to hundreds of thousands of connections and not had a failure. So it's an extremely reliable, quick connect for power. And if you do buy them, Amazon will sell you a bag. There's 3 different, the shell is the same, but there's 3 different kinds of the inserts you can get for
15 amp, 30 amp,
Yeah.
45.
and those are for different wire gauges. And I just buy the biggest one, the 45 amp version is a spread configuration, it's a little harder to crimp, but I just get the 12 gauge wire ones and solder whatever size wire I needed to them. Yeah, it works great. One other thing I was going to mention is you can buy the shells either loose, so they're separate, and they slide together, and you can put them together, it's permutations, at least 4 different ways, and only one of them is the Aries standard. So the thing to do is buy the ones that are bonded, because they're already set up in the Aries standard. It doesn't cost any more than buying the separate ones.
You mean positive, negative, or together? They're like together? Is that what
No.
you're saying?
It has them on the right side.
And they're
You could,
stuck
because of the way
together,
these
right?
interlock, you can literally reverse the black and the red if you choose to. And then it won't plug in properly to the standard configuration. So if you buy a box of 20, you're never going to need the reverse configuration. So if you buy a box of 20 of them, just get the pre-welded ones instead of having to look on the net and figure
The
out
one
what the right
thing
way to
is
put
when
it.
you're working with real heavy gauge wire, you gotta get both of them plugged in at the
Yep.
same time, and it gets kind of tricky.
I was going to say, if you start doing this and you actually start putting them together, there are some tricks to getting those contacts to slide into the shells. With big gauge wire, I clamp the wire down in my vise, put the shell down on top of it after I've got it aligned properly with needle nose pliers, and use a little hammer to tap them down on, and they snap right in. It works great. With much finer gauge wires, you can't do that because the wire's bent. What I do is put the shell in the vise, clamp it down fairly good, and use a little screwdriver to push the contacts down into it until they snap.
Hey Chip, one quick comment on,
Yeah.
on those. The order that you get black and red together, one of the things I read online was, I think it was read red on right.
Yeah.
So there's a very small A that you can read, and as long as that's on the right-hand side, you put both of them together, you're ready to go. That's
But the easy thing to do is just get the ones that are already bonded together. Because there is the ones we're passing around, you can see a little hole here. They send these with a pin that you can supposedly slip in there to lock them together and then use super glue. It's more trouble than it's worth. It's much easier just to buy than pre-bonded. And then they'll be the right configuration. Now, like I said, it's a great way to be able to real quickly walk into a place and plug your radio into stuff that other guys have. The other reason I showed this, there's a whole bunch of, for the RC community, these little meters, current and voltage meters that you can get for rechargeable batteries on eBay for anywhere from 10 to 30 bucks. They're much cheaper than the ones you can get from hand suppliers. And they just put the right connectors on them, and you have a real nice little current meter to go in your power supply system. Any questions on power poles?
You can leave that watt meter in line while you operate the radio?
I do, yeah, frequently. When I'm running on batteries, I always do, because I want to know what I'm doing to my battery and what the voltage is. Most radios anymore, if you get below about 11.5 volts, they get touchy. Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. That's it for the presenters.
I was new people, and I talked about this antenna last week, and I kind of want to push this antenna. This is this one's a 2 meter, but they sell a 2 meter UHF, VHF antenna. It's called a Slim Jim, and they're $23 on the internet, $5 postage. But for the new people that are got their HTs and whatnot, hang this on the back balcony or something, and this will increase your range tremendously. And Bob says these antennas are very convenient, but very inefficient. And I found
Convenient,
that
crappy antenna.
crappy antenna. I found that, we did a box run, box hunt not too long ago, and I learned a lot about those rubber duck antennas. They just get, they're crappy, okay? But this one here, I built, it cost me $5. Okay, but this is only a 2-meter antenna. I haven't figured out how to put the trap in for the UHF. So, but anyway, roll it up, put it in a bag, you can put it in the back of the car, you can throw up a tree, and you can put it horizontal, vertical, and it really increases the range of your HT. Okay, and this one's yours.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'll roll it up for you. Only 2 meters.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. But anyway, just I wanted to schedule it, take a look at these. You know, they're worth it.
All right. So that's it for the mobile install part. Remember, never put your radio on top of an airbag outlet. I mean, it goes off. You're going to get a Yaesu across your forehead, which sounds cool until you see it's actually backwards. And look later.